First cousins Osman Elmi and Mohammed Warfa are stacking shelves at their market in the heart of the city's Somali community.
They both came here as first-generation immigrants. The Civil War drove them here to America. They both wanted to have a better life. They were sending remittances back home to support those less fortunate. And as is true of many immigrants, they really wanted to make it big in America. So that really meant working hard.
Family would be happy we can send a check this month.
I'm first cousins with them. We were very close. In fact, I was living with Osman. He was getting married soon and starting the next chapter of his life.
And the rest you can send to your beautiful bride.
Don't start.
He always talked about having his own business. That was his dream. Mohammed was a poet by heart. He was a rising star who loved words, but was really hardworking. A father of 4 young kids. They were good buddies because they connected somehow through making other people, enjoy life. I called Osman before I left work, and I told him I was going to stop by the store. Was Mohammed there too?
He's here dropping cans everywhere.
They were joking. And over the phone, I'm telling them, well, I will be there in a second.
But hurry up before Mohammed drops anymore.
It was just another beautiful night for them until it was no longer.
Minneapolis 911.
I'm inside the grocery store. I heard gunshot. Please come here, please. I'm a mother. I have to be children.
Where are you?
I'm inside the frozen. I'm so scared. I'm so scared. Please help.
Officers enter the store. They verified that there were 3 victims, shooting victims. The officers actually found the 2 witnesses hiding in the cooler.
For us, our homicide unit called and told me that there was a triple shooting at the Seaward Market.
We needed to respond immediately.
When I arrived at the scene, excuse me, people, thank you. It almost looked like a carnival with so many lights, media, the squad lights. The crime lab was out there already. I talked to Sergeant Karakastas, who was the night detective, and he told me, you're not going to believe what you're going to see in here. And it was shocking. I mean, it was absolutely one of the worst things that I had seen.
The scene was quite bloody.
The first 2 victims looked like they were shot together because they were right at the front of the store, right next to each other.
Towards the back of the store is where we run into the 3rd victim. They're lying next to like a rack of food, which was tipped over. I mean, this scene looked absolutely like something out of a movie.
The cash register was not disturbed. I don't think anything behind the counter was disturbed.
It looked like a robbery gone bad. 3 people lost their lives and there wasn't anything taken. This crowd had gathered of Somali community members. They were able to hear, literally minutes after this happened, who had passed away.
Because the market was geared towards the immigrant community, because it was so violent and shocking for that neighborhood, I believe that's why there was such a response from people who lived around the community as, how can this happen?
It was quite clear the victims were beloved. So you've got a lot of people that are demanding answers. Who did this? Why did it happen? Why are they dead?
The shaken survivors of the attack are key to the police investigation.
Can you tell me what happened?
They said the two suspects entered the store and the one suspect runs towards them.
The woman who said he spoke to her in Somalian, and that guided the investigation that we were looking for at least one individual from the Somali community. The witnesses said the suspect heard the gunshot and he ran out of the door.
And the witnesses said they had hid in the cooler. She heard more gunshots and called 911.
Did you remain in the freezer until the officers found you?
She was very anxious, very afraid that somebody was going to come back to the store.
I have children.
She wanted the police to hurry so she could get back to her children.
Minutes later, the victim's cousin, Abdurazak, arrives.
What's happened?
When I saw a lot of police siren and police lights, I thought, maybe something happened at the store itself. The two of them that were in trouble.
My cousins are in there.
The police told us, yes, there are dead people in the store. And the fact that I was calling both of them, the minute I couldn't get hold of them, it dawned on me that both of them were gone. I just couldn't believe it. We were all in shock. I'm speaking as somebody who fled Somalia as a child when there was a civil war. To me, this was a lot more painful than the war that we fled as a family.
Police identify the third victim as 31-year-old Anwar Mohammed.
We noticed that there were cameras in this business. Not having a witness that had a lot for us, we knew that this was our only chance, actually having eyes on what happened.
Detectives access the surveillance system.
So, open up the camera by the door.
It just made us hopeful that we would be able to identify the suspects.
Started out around 7:45 p.m. Switch camera.
The two cousins are sitting behind the counter, close together.
Fast forward a minute.
It is hard as you're watching a video to see individuals who you know what is going to happen to them, so alive, talking and having no idea of they're in their last minutes of life.
It's absolutely unbelievable having seen the carnage and seeing their bodies laying there, to watching this, and these poor men have no idea what's coming. We saw two masked men come through that front door.
Rewind. Zoom in.
They are dressed in jackets. They have hoodies pulled up.
Change cameras. Pause. Zoom in.
They have no identifying facial features.
Keep playing.
The shorter male, he had a gun in his hand, and his intention is clearly that cash register.
Presumably, the shooter was demanding money.
Change cameras.
The taller, thinner one goes towards the back.
Pause. Zoom in.
The victim behind the cash register has his finger out.
I think he's trying to tell him something.
Keep playing. Let's change cameras.
The guy behind the register, the victim, he's not doing exactly what the person with the gun wants him to do.
He's sort of telling him to get on the ground, and he's not exactly cooperating.
Who's that?
Zoom in.
While the shorter guy is dealing with the cashier, Anwar walks in.
Obviously, from where he came in, he didn't know what was happening inside the store at the time.
Replay it.
He startles the suspect with the gun and gets shot. And then the events spiral from there. The other victims from behind the counter, they try to bum rush the suspect. He gets shot at the front of the store. Both suspects run out of the store through that main door.
What is he doing?
And you see Osman, he gets his cell phone out. It looks like he's trying to call 911.
Rewind it.
But the suspect with the gun comes back into the store and chases Osman.
And shoots him in the back. And then comes up and notices that one of the victims is still alive.
Replay it.
And as he's ready to flee out the door, shoots him again.
There was a conscious decision by the shooter to stop and fire this bullet into a man's head.
He was stone cold.
And then the suspect with the gun runs out of the store.
Watching this video, it took maybe 180 seconds from start to finish. Complete carnage. The shooting and the mass murders of 3 individuals.
Often you are able to separate yourself from what happened because you haven't seen it, so it's words on paper. This wasn't words on paper. This was visual.
It all seemed so terribly senseless.
I told Ann, I said, we have got to solve this. We have got to solve this. We've got to solve this.
Let's go back to the beginning.
We knew that we didn't have a face.
He had a bandana over his face, light blue bandana.
Pause.
You can see these strings dangling outside of his hood.
Keep playing. Pause. Zoom in.
You could also see he was wearing some type of boots.
Detectives turned to the second suspect, who went to the back of the market.
This is the other side of the store.
The angle down the aisle specifically that you could see the witnesses on.
Zoom in.
You can see the suspect, the second suspect, approach them.
We could see the individual corralling 2 people.
And then the second the shooting started,
Rewind it.
he immediately ran to get out of the store. Looked like he was just as startled by the gunshots as the witnesses.
Rewind it.
He was wearing black clothing
Stop.
and he had a black mask on.
Look at that. Zoom in.
Look at that shirt.
But the black sweatshirt he was wearing, you could see at the base of the black sweatshirt, it had a white and black horizontal striped shirt. He also had white shoes on. I think they had markings on them. Those clothing items that they were wearing might be crucial to this case.
As detectives move on, the local community gathers near the Seaward Market.
We grieve together. The community, they come out to both support the family and so send a statement that this was a crime against the Somali community. And showing up meant saying no to the crime and crimes of that nature. This cannot be one of the other crimes where there is no resolution to it. And not only that, it's got to be solved as fast as possible.
You had an entire community that wanted an arrest. The victims, they left a country that had war and had poverty, and they came here to better themselves. Everything that goes with the American dream coming here, and this is the way their life ended tragically.
It brings home your need to, or your desire to help them see justice done for their loved ones.
Police released details of the crime to the public.
In the initial hours after the homicide, an appeal was put out for tips.
For us?
If you think you saw something, heard something,
Which direction?
please call. There was a lot of tips early on.
Okay.
Police follow up on all leads with no immediate success.
Car.
But then 36 hours into the investigation, somebody had come in to our headquarters, Detective Shows, and wanted to talk to the investigators, saying that they knew one of the suspects. Detective Shows?
Minneapolis detectives follow up on an anonymous tip.
They stated that there was an individual named Abdisalan Ali that had been talking about the Seaward Market.
The way this tip told the events, we believe that Abdi Ali may have been inside the store during the robbery homicide. We wanted to get Abdisalan Ali into our office as quickly as possible.
Police track the suspect down at home.
That individual was brought in to the Minneapolis downtown police office.
So where were you?
He confirmed that he was with two persons throughout the day before the shooting happened.
I got dropped off at home.
And he claims that after his different errands, he was dropped off at home. He denied being in the store, ever even entering the store.
But Abdisalan Ali is hesitant to give the names of anyone else.
We did tell him the urgency of helping us. I mean, there's 3 men that are dead. They have families. You really need to help us. You do.
He provides 2 names.
He said Ahmed Ali and Mari Ali. And then it was like, okay, we're getting somewhere.
We had names of suspects.
Detectives learn that Ahmed and Mahdi Ali are both teenagers with no criminal records.
Now we need to find out if he's telling us the truth. So he goes on to tell us the events that happened prior to the robbery, that they had actually stopped at several locations within South Minneapolis.
Police hope to either confirm the 2 men as suspects or prove Abdus Ali is lying by using CCTV from these locations.
Abdi Ali told us the day of January 6th, him and Ahmed were picked up by Mahdi at about 3 o'clock from their school in a red Crown Victoria.
And where did you go?
He tells us they go to the impound lot because a car associated with Mahdi Ali had been towed. They went to a gas station in a very busy area of South Minneapolis. We learned of a third location, which is a check cashing spot, again, in another very busy part of South Minneapolis.
Detectives head to the check cashing business to find out if Abdus Ali is telling the truth.
Detective, show us.
Detective Porras, can we take a look at your CCTV footage?
Abdi Ali told us that he sat outside and that Mahdi and Ahmed went inside with the intent to rob the place.
What you're hoping to see by looking at the video is exactly who shot the victim's face to go with the body in the Seward Market.
Okay, can you bring up footage from January 6th? Okay, fast forward. Stop. Rewind.
There were two suspects. They went in the hallway of the check cashing business.
Stop.
The taller of the two had those very distinct pants.
Zoom in.
He had a white and black striped shirt. You can see that came out from the bottom of that jacket.
It's the same shirt, I'm sure.
And we knew that that was the person in the back of the store at the Seward Market the night of the murders, had the same style shirt.
Rewind. Play it. Pause.
You can see that the other suspect, he's got a hat on and dangling strings on it.
And I remember the video of the Seward Market, and that was when I was just like, holy cow. And I'm like, look at the strings, look at the strings, look at the strings.
He's got the light blue jean pants, and he's got boots on.
Detectives have a clothing match for the shooter.
Could you change cameras?
I don't think they were familiar with the business. They went into the lobby.
Rewind it.
They were acting very suspicious, noticed people in, and away they went. It looked like they determined that there was too many people in the lobby, and they walked in, and they literally walked out.
Stop. Pause there. Zoom in on his face.
It was just as frustrating as it was the very first time we saw the Seward Market video.
I can't make it out.
We never were able to get a clear shot of their face.
It's no good. We can't make him out.
Detectives have two likely suspects casing the check cashing business. But it's not enough to ID them as Mahdi and Ahmed.
Just because we have Abdi Salan saying, yes, this was them, we have no way to 100% say, yes, that's them. Another location that Abdi Salan had talked about was the impound lot, where cars are towed. They have very good camera systems.
Hey, can you cut it up to 5 p.m.?
And it is there that we see all three of them.
Rewind.
What we believe is Mahdi Ali, Ahmed Ali, and Abdi Ali.
Change cameras.
All enter the impound area.
We were just waiting for them, stepping up to the counter.
Change cameras.
The level of excitement was about 1,000. hoping that we could get a clear shot. The first two suspects went up to the counter.
The other guy, wearing black jeans and white shoes, walked away.
Change cameras.
Detectives focus on the two individuals at the counter.
One of them was tall and skinny,
Stop there and zoom in.
and below the sweatshirt is a white and black horizontally striped shirt with the black jeans and the white tennis shoes.
The height and clothing matches the accomplice in the Seaward Market footage. Detectives turn to the other man talking to the cashier.
We had the information from Abdi Salah that Mahdi Ali was trying to get a car out. We believe that this was Mahdi Ali. The guy was shorter.
We knew that the shooter was short.
He was wearing skinny leg blue jeans rolled up at the bottom, and he was wearing those tan boots.
Switch camera.
And he has his hoodie down, but he has a stocking cap with strings hanging, which we call hockey hats here. Mahdi Ali could be our shooter.
Detectives are desperate for an identifying shot.
Can you zoom in on his face?
But I remember seeing the video and it not being as clear as I wanted it to be.
Still can't make it out.
It was just very frustrating. You could see details like the clothing they were wearing, but detail of their faces, that was more difficult.
Detectives have just one more stop on their list of locations given to them by Abdisalan Ali. It's their last chance for a clear shot of the suspects.
We went to a Super America, and we know those Super Americas have great video there.
So do you still have CCTV footage from January 6th? Please.
Detectives scan through footage filmed in the late afternoon.
Can you fast forward? Pause. Rewind. Zoom in.
Black and white striped shirt, black jeans, and the white shoes. So that's the second suspect that was in the back of the store.
Detectives still don't have a clear shot of his face.
Change cameras. Stop.
He looks up at the camera, and we get a very clear picture.
Zoom in.
Of the second suspect, who we believe to be Ahmed.
Detectives bring Ahmed Ali in for questioning. They need him to confirm the shooter's identity.
We just explained to him that we know you're not the shooter, but by lying to us, you can get the same sentence as the shooter.
Just really want to understand what happened that night.
Ahmed Ali was offered a substantial reduction in potential sentence in order to testify.
Just want to.
Often we wouldn't make such an offer, but there was pressure from the community.
Because they know who he was, he left it in the car, so.
And it was just a matter of a few minutes where he told us that the shooter was Mahdi Ali. We were extremely happy where we had gotten to this point.
He did admit that he went to the Seaward Market with Mahdi with the intention of robbing the store, but he claimed he did not know Mahdi had a gun with him.
We went to where Mahdi Ali lived.
We waited around in the lobby area in the parking lot.
There's no guy. Hey, Mahdi? Mahdi Ali?
He definitely had the right height and build of the person that did this shooting at the Seaward Market. We approached him and brought him back to the station.
Detectives need Mahdi to reveal information that implicates him in the crime.
We do need to go back to Wednesday. Okay, that's when the murder happened. Okay.
Mahdi claims he was at home in the late afternoon.
And I left there around 4:30. I left home. I was driving the Convict, the red car. Okay, you got the car? Yes, that's the car. And I went to VOA. Okay. To the school that Abi Salam and I made those. Okay. I picked them up and then went to impound lot. And we walked in together. And then we went straight to Lindell and 22nd for a $5 gas. I dropped off Abi Salam 7:05, something like that. And then I dropped him off. Who? I met. Okay. Got home around 8:32, something like that. Back to your home? Back to my home. Okay.
Mahdi Ali does not mention the money transfer business or the Seaward Market.
We have the video. You guys are inside. So where? But you guys are inside together, walking down the hallway together. You guys are in a building together.
The unfortunate thing for you is there's too much video.
Okay.
We can see what you are wearing. We can see what Ahmed is wearing. Then when we look at camera and video from different places,
Like the store.
because you went into a store that you frequent all the time, and you're trying to rob people that you know, and they called you out on it, and then something really bad happened.
And then we would show them the video at the Seaward Market. That you? Nope. Is this you at the other money market? Nope. Is this? Nope. Everything was no, no, no.
I'll tell you what, I don't know what y'all talking about. No idea what y'all talking about. The motor case you're talking about, I don't even know how that happened. It had nothing to do with that.
He decided that he was going to be smarter than Ann and I, and basically denied everything, every involvement.
With Mahdi not revealing any incriminating information, police still need concrete evidence against him.
At the time that Mahdi Ali was arrested, a number of his items of clothing were taken from his closet in his apartment. One of the items was a pair of jeans that had the cuffs rolled up. So it gave a white bottom.
Inside one of the pant pockets, we were able to find blood.
Forensics teams analyzed the discovery.
For us, we'd gotten a call back from the forensic scientist, and he had told us in so many words that he was 100% certain.
That blood did match one of the victims.
We've got him.
We're obviously very happy that we had evidence that clearly put Mahdi there at the scene.
Supported by the CCTV footage, detectives now have the concrete evidence they need to prosecute. Accomplice Ahmed Ali pleads guilty to 3 counts of aggravated attempted robbery. With his testimony, he is given a reduced sentence of 18 years in prison. Maudie Alley pleads not guilty, but in 2011, jurors convict him for first and second-degree murder and attempted armed robbery. He is sentenced to life. Abdisalan Ali is found not to be involved and faces no charge.
Maudie showed absolutely no remorse or regret. He never acknowledged any part in the crime. And from the times that I saw him in court, his eyes were almost blank.
Maudie Ali's age, just 17 years old, ultimately affects his sentence.
Later, the Supreme Court ruled that individuals who committed crimes as juveniles cannot be sentenced to life without parole, that is unconstitutional sentence. So we had to re-sentence Mr. Ali. He'd have to serve 3 sentences before he could be released, which effectively would keep him in jail for the rest of his life.
The CCTV allows police to piece together a terrible crime that may have otherwise gone unpunished.
We learned that Monty had a car in the impound lot. He went there to try and get it out. He didn't have enough money. And once we learned that, we thought, okay, maybe is this why he went to the first money marketplace to do a quick hit? He wasn't able to pull it off there.
They dropped Abdisalan off at home.
Then he was going to hit the Seaward Market. Mahdi believed that the time of night, this was going to be their opportune time.
Get the money right now!
The CCTV shows Osman Elmi gesturing to the gunman. Police now believe he recognized the assailant from the local community.
We think they were saying to him, "You're Mahdi, I know your mother. I know your mother. She always comes in here, so you're Mahdi." So he's got to be worried. And then Anwar came in and startled Mahdi.
And it just basically took him by surprise. And that is when the complete carnage began.
Shot 2 people, ran out of the store, and then within seconds came back in the store and chased down Osman and killed him.
It was self-preservation, I believe, for him, because it was like, now I'm in the situation, I just shot somebody, and I have other witnesses here. I have to finish this, otherwise I could get caught. I need to do what I need to do. The mass murders of 3 individuals.
It is fair to say that the video from the market is what the case is built around, and other videos that were obtained all really helped us bring these people to justice.
Video evidence is very, I mean, it's just, you can't change it. It just is, factual. And the video evidence in this case was very compelling.
If we did not have that video footage from when inside the Seaward Market,
Look at that, zoom in.
I can honestly say we never would have solved it.
People really had an vested interest in making sure the murderers get what they deserved. What I can't wrap around my head is how violent and how cold-blooded they were. To me, that's just something that I don't understand. How could you be so cold and callous that you could do something like this in seconds? I mean, all 3, Anwar, Mohammed, and Osman, were really at the prime of their time. And it was less than a minute he killed 3 people. It was a crime against the whole community. It's going to be something that will stay for the rest of their lives.
It began as an ordinary day in Honolulu, the kind of day that unfolds without expectation, where people move through their routines with quiet certainty. The air carried the steady rhythm of a place accustomed to both movement and calm, a city where public spaces are filled with the overlapping presence of strangers who, for a brief moment, share the same physical environment without sharing anything else. There was nothing in the atmosphere to suggest that this particular day would become marked by violence, nothing that would distinguish it from the countless others that had come before it. And yet, within that ordinary setting, something irreversible was about to take place. In a public area, surrounded by people who had their own destinations and concerns, a confrontation unfolded with a speed that left little time for comprehension. It did not begin with chaos, but with something quieter, an approach, an encounter between two individuals whose history was invisible to those around them. To the outside observer, it may have appeared as nothing more than an interaction, something that could have been resolved in words or simply passed by without consequence. But beneath that surface, there existed a tension that had been building long before this moment, a tension that was not visible but deeply present. The woman at the center of this moment was Teresa Cachula. To those who did not know her, she was simply another person moving through a shared space, indistinguishable from anyone else. There was no sign, no outward indication that she was carrying the weight of a personal situation that had already begun to shift in dangerous ways. Her presence in that moment was unremarkable in the way that everyday life often is, defined by routine rather than by disruption. Then, in a matter of seconds, everything changed. The man who approached her was not a stranger, though to the people nearby, he might as well have been. Their connection, their history, the complexities of their relationship, all of it existed outside the awareness of those who would soon become witnesses. What followed was not prolonged or drawn out. It was abrupt, direct, and final in its execution. A weapon was produced, and the sound that followed shattered the illusion of normalcy that had defined the moment just before. There is a particular kind of shock that occurs when violence intrudes into a public space, especially when it happens without warning. It is not only the act itself that is disturbing, but the realization that something so extreme can occur in a place that feels familiar, even safe. The people who were present did not have time to prepare, to process, or to understand. They were suddenly confronted with a reality that did not align with the expectations of their surroundings. In the immediate aftermath, confusion took hold. What had just happened was not immediately clear, not fully understood. The mind resists sudden shifts from normalcy to crisis, attempting to reconcile what it has just witnessed with what it believes to be possible. But as the reality of the situation became undeniable, that confusion gave way to something heavier, a recognition that this was not an accident, not a misunderstanding, but an act of deliberate violence. Teresa was critically injured. The response that followed was immediate, shaped by urgency and the instinct to intervene, to assist, to do something in the face of something that could not be undone. Emergency services were contacted, and efforts were made to provide aid. In those moments, time seemed to compress, each second carrying more weight than it should, each action measured against the possibility of survival. But despite those efforts, the outcome did not change. The injuries she sustained were too severe, the damage too great. The attempt to preserve life, to reverse what had been set in motion, ultimately failed. Teresa Cachula did not survive. The man who had carried out the act did not remain at the scene. He left, moving away from the immediate consequences of what he had done, leaving behind a space that had been irrevocably altered. His departure added another layer to the unfolding situation, transforming it from an act of violence into the beginning of a search, an investigation that would attempt to trace his movements and understand what had occurred. For those who witnessed the event, the experience did not end when the scene was cleared or when the immediate danger had passed. The memory of what they had seen remained, fixed in a way that ordinary moments are not. It became something that would be revisited, reconsidered, and remembered, not as a distant event, but as something that had happened within their own line of sight, within a space that had once felt predictable. What makes moments like this particularly difficult to comprehend is not only their severity, but their context. Violence that occurs in isolation, removed from public view, can be understood in one way. But when it happens in the open, in a place where people expect a certain degree of safety, it challenges assumptions about where and how such acts can occur. It forces a reconsideration of the boundaries between private conflict and public consequence. And yet, as shocking as the moment was, it did not emerge without cause. It was not a random act, not an isolated incident disconnected from what had come before. The confrontation that led to Teresa's death was the culmination of something that had been developing over time, something that had already begun to take shape in ways that were not immediately visible to those outside the situation. This is often the case in incidents of this nature. What appears sudden is, in reality, the final point in a sequence that has been unfolding gradually. The signs may be subtle, the changes incremental, but they exist, forming a pattern that, when viewed in retrospect, becomes more apparent. The difficulty lies in recognizing those patterns before they reach a critical point, before they manifest in a way that cannot be reversed. In the case of Teresa Cachula, the moment of violence was not the beginning of the story. It was the point at which everything that had been building beneath the surface became visible, undeniable, and irreversible. The challenge, then, is not only to understand what happened in that moment, but to examine what led up to it, to trace the progression from tension to confrontation, from instability to violence. Because within that progression lies the key to understanding not just this case, but others like it. It is in the details that precede the act, in the conditions that allow such situations to develop, that the broader significance of the event can be found. The moment itself, as shocking as it is only one part of a larger narrative, one that extends beyond the immediate circumstances and into the underlying dynamics that made it possible. As the investigation would later reveal, the relationship between Teresa and the man who took her life was not defined by a single moment, but by a series of interactions, patterns, and behaviors that had evolved over time. To understand the full scope of what happened, it is necessary to move beyond the event itself and into the context that shaped it. But in that first moment, in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, none of that context was visible. There was only the scene, the shock, and the realization that something irreversible had occurred. The details, the explanations, the deeper understanding, all of that would come later, pieced together through investigation and reflection. What remained in that moment was the stark reality of loss. A life that had been part of the everyday fabric of the community was suddenly gone, removed not by chance, but by an act that carried with it a weight that would not easily be resolved. The space where it happened would return to its normal function, the routines would resume, but the memory of what had taken place would remain, altering the way that space was understood by those who had been there. And so the story begins, not with a mystery waiting to be solved, but with a moment that demands to be understood. A moment that, in its suddenness, reveals the fragility of the assumptions that shape everyday life. A moment that forces a deeper examination of what lies beneath the surface, of what can exist unseen until it becomes impossible to ignore. To understand what happened to Teresa Cachula, it is necessary to step away from the moment of violence and return to the quieter, less visible layers of her life, the ones that rarely draw attention but shape everything that follows. Before her name became associated with a tragedy, before it was spoken in the context of a public act of violence, she existed within the rhythms of ordinary life on Oahu, moving through days defined not by crisis, but by routine, responsibility, and the effort to maintain stability. She was described as hardworking, a person who understood the value of consistency and effort. That description, while simple, suggests a life structured around purpose, where time is not left unfilled but directed toward maintaining something tangible. Her role as the operator of a small business reflects that orientation. Running even a modest enterprise requires attention, discipline, and a willingness to manage uncertainty, to navigate the unpredictable shifts that come with any independent endeavor. It is not a passive role, but an active one, demanding both resilience and focus. Within her community, there was little to distinguish her from others who shared similar paths. She was part of a social environment that functioned on familiarity, where interactions were routine and expectations were stable. There is a kind of anonymity in such settings, not in the sense of being unknown, but in the sense of being understood within a framework that does not invite deeper scrutiny. People see what is presented to them, and unless something disrupts that presentation, there is little reason to look beyond it. From that perspective, Teresa's life appeared steady. She was building something for herself, maintaining connections, and moving forward in a way that did not suggest immediate concern. But beneath that surface, there was another layer, one that was not as visible, one that existed within the private space of her personal relationship. Her marriage, at this stage, was no longer stable. It had entered a period of strain, marked by tension that had not been resolved but had instead accumulated over time. The decision to separate is rarely sudden. It is usually the result of a gradual realization that something fundamental is no longer sustainable. In Teresa's case, that realization appears to have already taken hold. She was in the process of distancing herself from a relationship that had become increasingly difficult, one defined not by mutual support, but by imbalance and control. The man she was separating from was described as controlling, a term that carries specific implications. Control within a relationship does not always present itself in overt or dramatic ways. It can manifest subtly, through restrictions, through the shaping of behavior, through the creation of conditions where one person's autonomy is gradually limited. Over time, these patterns can become normalized, accepted as part of the relationship even when they create discomfort or fear. In addition to this controlling behavior, there were indications of something more direct, signs that the relationship had included elements of intimidation or threat. These signs are important not because they predict a specific outcome, but because they indicate a dynamic that has the potential to escalate. When control is combined with the possibility of violence, the situation becomes inherently unstable, even if that instability is not immediately visible to those outside the relationship. Teresa, according to available information, was aware of this instability. She had expressed fear for her safety, a recognition that the situation was not simply uncomfortable, but potentially dangerous. This awareness is significant because it suggests that the risks were not abstract or theoretical, but felt and understood on a personal level. Fear, in this context, is not an overreaction. It is a response to patterns that have already been observed, to behaviors that have already crossed certain boundaries. And yet, despite this awareness, life continued. This is one of the most complex aspects of situations like this, the coexistence of fear and normalcy. People do not always have the ability to immediately remove themselves from difficult circumstances. There are practical considerations, emotional ties, and structural limitations that can make separation a gradual process rather than an immediate one. During that process, the individual often continues to engage with everyday responsibilities, maintaining the appearance of stability even as underlying tensions persist. For Teresa, this meant continuing to operate her business, to interact with her community, to move through public spaces as she always had. To those around her, these actions reinforced the perception of normalcy. There were no visible disruptions, no obvious signals that something had shifted. The private reality remained contained within the boundaries of the relationship, not fully accessible to the outside world. This separation between public appearance and private experience is a recurring feature in cases involving intimate partner conflict. It creates a gap in understanding where the external perspective does not align with the internal reality. People see what is visible, and what is visible is often shaped by necessity, by the need to continue functioning despite underlying difficulties. Over time, however, the internal dynamics of such relationships do not remain static. Patterns of control, if unchallenged, can intensify. Tensions can build, especially in situations where one party is attempting to assert independence while the other resists that change. The process of separation itself can become a point of escalation, a moment where existing dynamics are tested and, in some cases, pushed to extremes. In this context, the relationship between Teresa and her husband was not simply deteriorating, it was moving through a phase of heightened instability. The decision to separate introduced a new element, one that altered the balance of the relationship and created conditions where control could be challenged. For someone accustomed to maintaining that control, such a shift can provoke reactions that are difficult to predict but often rooted in the desire to reassert dominance. It is important to note that these dynamics do not operate in isolation. They are influenced by individual behavior, by emotional responses, and by the broader environment in which the relationship exists. But at their core, they reflect a pattern, one where control and resistance interact in ways that can lead to escalation if not addressed. For Teresa, this meant navigating a situation that was already complex and becoming increasingly so. She was attempting to move forward, to create distance, to establish a different path for herself. At the same time, she was dealing with a relationship that had not yet fully released its hold, one that continued to exert pressure even as it was being dismantled. This dual reality, moving forward while still being connected to something unstable, created a tension that was not immediately visible but deeply significant. It is within this tension that the foundation of what would later occur can be found. Not in a single moment or a single decision, but in the accumulation of circumstances that, over time, created a situation where the possibility of escalation was always present. To those outside the relationship, none of this was fully apparent. They saw a woman who was working, who was present, who was continuing her life. They did not see the underlying strain, the fear that had been expressed, or the patterns that had developed over time. This disconnect is not unusual, but it is critical to understanding how situations like this can progress without immediate intervention. Because the moment that would later define this case did not emerge from nowhere. It was the result of a trajectory, one that began long before that day in Honolulu, shaped by interactions and decisions that unfolded over time. To understand that moment, it is necessary to recognize the context in which it occurred, the environment that allowed it to develop, and the signals that, while present, were not fully acted upon. In this way, the story of Teresa Cachula is not only about what happened in a single, devastating moment, but about the conditions that made that moment possible. It is about the quiet, often unseen processes that unfold within relationships, the ways in which tension can build, and the difficulty of recognizing when that tension has reached a point where it can no longer be contained. The day unfolded with the same quiet predictability that had defined so many others in Honolulu, a rhythm shaped by movement, routine, and the unspoken understanding that public spaces are shared yet uneventful. People pass through the area with their own intentions, some focused, some distracted, each carrying private concerns that remained separate from the collective environment. There was nothing in the atmosphere to suggest that the balance of that space was about to be broken, nothing to indicate that within a matter of moments, an act of violence would disrupt the ordinary flow of the day. Teresa Cachula was there, present within that shared space, engaged in what appeared to be a normal moment in her day. To those around her, she was indistinguishable from anyone else, another individual moving through a familiar setting without drawing attention. There were no visible markers of the tension that existed in her personal life, no outward signs that would signal to a passerby that she was navigating a situation defined by instability and fear. The separation between what was visible and what was not remained intact, preserving the illusion that everything was as it should be. The man who approached her entered that space with a different purpose, one that was not apparent to those nearby. His presence, like hers, did not immediately disrupt the environment. There was no sudden alarm, no immediate recognition that something was wrong. To an outside observer, the initial interaction may have seemed unremarkable, an encounter between two people who knew each other, a moment that might pass without consequence. What followed unfolded quickly, compressing time in a way that made it difficult for those present to process what they were seeing. The interaction did not evolve gradually. It shifted abruptly from ordinary to critical. A confrontation took place, brief and direct, its details not fully understood by those who witnessed it, but its intensity unmistakable. There was no extended exchange, no prolonged escalation that might have allowed others to intervene or anticipate what was about to happen. Then, in a matter of seconds, the situation crossed a threshold from which there was no return. A weapon was drawn, transforming the encounter into something entirely different, something that no longer belonged within the realm of everyday experience. The sound that followed cut through the ambient noise of the environment, sharp and definitive, leaving no ambiguity about what had just occurred. For those present, the moment fractured their understanding of the space they occupied. The familiar became unfamiliar, the predictable replaced by something sudden and uncontrollable. There is a distinct psychological shift that occurs when violence erupts in a public setting, particularly when it happens without warning. The mind struggles to reconcile the event with its surroundings, to understand how something so extreme can occur in a place that moments before felt entirely ordinary. Teresa was struck, the impact immediate and severe. The transition from movement to stillness, from participation in the environment to being at the center of an emergency, happened in an instant. There was no time for preparation, no opportunity to respond in a way that might alter the course of events. The act had already taken place, and its consequences were already unfolding. In the immediate aftermath, the response was fragmented, shaped by shock and urgency. Witnesses reacted in different ways, some frozen by what they had seen, others moving instinctively toward action, attempting to provide assistance, to make sense of the situation, to do something in the face of something that could not be undone. Voices overlapped, movements became less coordinated, and the space that had once been defined by routine was now defined by crisis. Emergency services were contacted, initiating a response that would attempt to stabilize the situation. Time, in these moments, does not move in a consistent way. It expands and contracts, each second carrying a disproportionate weight as the outcome remains uncertain. The focus shifts entirely to survival, to the possibility, however slim, that intervention can change what has already been set in motion. Teresa was transported for medical care, the effort to preserve her life continuing beyond the immediate scene. But the severity of her injuries imposed limits that could not be overcome. Despite the response, despite the urgency, the outcome remained unchanged. She did not survive. The man who had carried out the act did not remain. His departure from the scene added another dimension to the unfolding situation, transforming it into not only a response to violence, but the beginning of a pursuit. His absence created questions that could not yet be answered, leaving behind a space marked by both what had occurred and what was still unknown. For those who witnessed the event, the experience did not resolve when the immediate danger passed. The memory of the moment remained, fixed in a way that ordinary experiences are not. It became something that would be revisited, not by choice, but by the nature of its impact. The unpredictability of the event, the speed with which it unfolded, and the severity of its outcome combined to create a lasting impression that extended beyond the moment itself. What makes this incident particularly difficult to comprehend is not only the act of violence, but the context in which it occurred. Public spaces are generally associated with a degree of safety, a shared understanding that while they are open and accessible, they are not typically the setting for extreme acts. When that expectation is broken, it forces a reevaluation of what those spaces represent, of how they function, and of what can occur within them. And yet, as sudden as the event appeared, it was not without context. The confrontation between Teresa and the man who approached her was not an isolated interaction, but the culmination of a relationship that had already been marked by tension and instability. The moment of violence did not emerge from nothing. It was the result of a progression, one that had been developing over time, largely out of view. This distinction is important because it shifts the focus from the moment itself to the conditions that preceded it. The act, while immediate and irreversible, is only one part of the narrative. To understand it fully, it must be placed within the broader framework of the relationship, the dynamics that shaped it, and the factors that contributed to its escalation. In that sense, the incident represents both an endpoint and a revelation. It is the endpoint of a sequence of events that had been building beneath the surface, and it is a revelation in that it brings those underlying dynamics into the open, making visible what had previously been concealed. The challenge lies in bridging the gap between these two aspects, in connecting the moment of violence to the context that made it possible. For the people who were present that day, however, the immediate reality was not analytical, but experiential. They did not see the progression, the build-up, or the underlying dynamics. They saw only the moment itself, the sudden shift from normalcy to crisis, the irreversible outcome that followed. Their understanding of the event would develop later, shaped by information that was not available in that initial moment. In the space where it happened, the physical traces of the event would eventually be cleared, the visible signs removed, and the area returned to its usual function. But the memory of what occurred would remain, altering the way that space was perceived by those who had been there. It would no longer be just a location, but a place where something significant and irreversible had taken place. And so, the incident stands as a moment that cannot be isolated from its context, even as it remains defined by its immediacy. It is both a singular event and the result of a broader trajectory, one that extends beyond the boundaries of that day and into the deeper structures of the relationship that preceded it. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, the environment that had just moments before been defined by routine transformed into a structured scene of investigation. Law enforcement in Honolulu moved quickly, not only to secure the area but to preserve what remained of the event in a form that could later be examined, interpreted, and understood. The urgency of the situation did not eliminate the need for method. Instead, it intensified it. Every detail, no matter how small, carried potential significance, and the responsibility of capturing those details fell to investigators who had to act with both speed and precision. The first stage of the investigation focused on the immediate scene, where the physical reality of what had occurred was still present. Witnesses were identified and separated, each one holding a fragment of the event as they had experienced it. Their accounts, while individually limited, collectively formed the initial framework through which the sequence of events could be reconstructed. These statements were not identical. They varied in perspective, in clarity, and in emphasis, shaped by where each person had been standing, what they had been paying attention to, and how they had processed the sudden shift from normalcy to crisis. Despite these differences, certain elements aligned. There was agreement on the central facts, the approach of the man, the brief confrontation, the moment when the weapon was drawn, and the shots that followed. These points of convergence allowed investigators to establish a baseline narrative, a sequence that could be supported by multiple independent observations. At the same time, the variations in detail highlighted the limitations of perception, reminding investigators that even in a shared moment, experiences are not identical. In parallel with witness interviews, attention turned to the physical evidence available at the scene. While the data provided in this case does not specify detailed forensic findings, the general process remains consistent. Investigators would have documented the layout of the area, noting positions, distances, and any elements that could help clarify the mechanics of the event. This documentation serves as a static representation of a dynamic moment, capturing in still form what had unfolded in motion. Another critical component of the early investigation was the use of surveillance footage. In a modern urban environment, cameras often provide an additional layer of observation, one that is not subject to the same limitations as human memory. Footage from nearby cameras would have been collected and reviewed, offering a visual record that could confirm or clarify the sequence established through witness statements. The integration of these sources, human accounts, and recorded images allowed investigators to refine their understanding, reducing uncertainty where possible and identifying areas where further inquiry was needed. As these elements came together, the identity of the suspect became clear. The man involved in the shooting was not an unknown individual, but the husband of Teresa Kachula. This identification shifted the investigation from a search for an unknown perpetrator to a targeted effort focused on locating a specific individual whose connection to the victim provided both context and urgency. The nature of that connection, already understood in general terms, reinforced the seriousness of a situation and the need for a coordinated response. With the suspect identified, the focus expanded beyond the immediate scene to include his movements following the incident. This transition marked the beginning of a broader operational phase, one that involved not only analysis, but active pursuit. Law enforcement agencies initiated a search designed to locate and apprehend him as quickly as possible, recognizing both the risk he posed and the need to bring clarity to the case. The search effort drew attention across the region, reflecting the public nature of the crime and the urgency of the situation. Information was disseminated, resources were mobilized, and investigators worked to reconstruct the suspect's path from the moment he left the scene. This reconstruction relied on multiple sources, including witness observations, potential surveillance footage, and any other data that could indicate direction, timing, and location. Tracking an individual in the immediate aftermath of a crime presents inherent challenges. Time becomes a critical factor, as the window for direct observation narrows with each passing moment. The suspect's movements, once removed from the immediate vicinity of the scene, become more difficult to trace, requiring investigators to piece together indirect indicators rather than relying on continuous observation. Despite these challenges, the effort continued, driven by the need to resolve the situation and prevent further harm. As the search progressed, investigators were able to narrow their focus, identifying areas of interest and refining their understanding of the suspect's trajectory. Each piece of information contributed to a larger picture, one that gradually reduced the range of possibilities and brought the search closer to resolution. This process, while methodical, was also shaped by uncertainty, as not every lead could be confirmed and not every gap could be immediately filled. The turning point in the investigation came when the suspect was located. However, the outcome was not what might have been expected in a conventional case. Instead of an arrest, instead of an opportunity to question and interrogate, investigators encountered a different reality. The suspect had died by suicide, bringing an abrupt end to the pursuit phase of the investigation. This development introduced a new set of limitations. With the suspect no longer alive, the possibility of obtaining a direct account of his actions, motivations, and intentions was eliminated. There would be no interrogation, no opportunity to confront inconsistencies, no chance to explore the details that only he could provide. The investigation, while still able to establish what had happened, would now face inherent constraints in explaining why it had happened in the way that it did. The absence of a living suspect also affected the structure of the case moving forward. In many investigations, the process continues into a legal phase where evidence is presented, challenged, and evaluated in a courtroom setting. That phase serves not only to determine accountability, but to create a formal record of the event, one that is examined from multiple perspectives. In this case, that process would not occur in the usual way. Instead, the investigation had to rely entirely on the evidence that could be gathered independently of the suspect's input. Witness statements, surveillance footage, and the known history of the relationship became the primary sources through which the event could be understood. These sources, while valuable, do not provide the same level of insight as direct testimony. They describe actions and patterns, but they do not fully reveal internal motivations or the precise sequence of thoughts that led to the act. This limitation does not invalidate the findings of the investigation, but it does shape them. It means that the narrative constructed from the evidence is necessarily incomplete, not in terms of what occurred, but in terms of the deeper explanations that might otherwise be explored. Investigators can establish the sequence of events with a high degree of confidence, but the underlying reasons remain partially obscured. Despite these constraints, the investigation fulfilled its primary function: to determine what happened, to identify the individual responsible, and to document the circumstances of a case. It provided a structured account of the incident, one that could be communicated to the public and used as a basis for broader understanding. At the same time, it highlighted the challenges inherent in cases where critical elements, such as the suspect's testimony, are no longer available. As the investigative phase drew to a close, the focus began to shift once again, moving from the process of reconstruction to the implications of what had been uncovered. The absence of a trial, the lack of direct testimony, and the unresolved questions about motivation all contributed to a sense that, while the case had been addressed, it had not been fully resolved in the way that many might expect. And yet, within these limitations, there remained a clear and undeniable outcome. The sequence of events had been established, the connection between the individuals involved had been confirmed, and the act itself had been documented with sufficient clarity to leave no doubt about what had occurred. The investigation, though constrained, had achieved its central objective, even as it left certain aspects of the story beyond complete understanding. In most criminal cases, the conclusion of an investigation marks the beginning of another process, one that unfolds in a courtroom where facts are tested, narratives are challenged, and a formal judgment is reached through structured legal procedures. It is within that setting that evidence is examined under scrutiny, that opposing arguments are presented, and that a version of events is ultimately codified into a legal outcome. But in the case surrounding Teresa Cachula, that transition never occurred in the way it typically does. The trajectory of the case was altered by a single development that removed the possibility of a conventional trial, leaving behind a different kind of resolution, one defined not by courtroom proceedings, but by their absence. When the suspect was found to have died by suicide, the legal path forward shifted immediately. There would be no arrest leading to arraignment, no formal charges brought before a court, no opportunity for prosecutors to present their case or for a defense to respond. The structured environment of a trial, with its rules, its procedures, and its capacity to examine evidence in detail, was no longer available. Instead, the case reached a point where the question of legal accountability, in its traditional form, could not be pursued further. This absence of a trial carries implications that extend beyond procedure. In a courtroom, the narrative of a case is not only presented, but also contested. Evidence is subjected to examination, witnesses are questioned, and the sequence of events is reconstructed through a process that allows for clarification, contradiction, and refinement. It is through this process that a public and formal understanding of the case is developed, one that is recorded and, in many ways, finalized. Without that process, the narrative remains shaped primarily by the investigation itself, without the additional layer of scrutiny that a trial provides. In this case, the findings of the investigation stood as the primary account of what had occurred. Law enforcement had established the sequence of events, identified the individual responsible, and documented the circumstances surrounding the incident. These findings, while clear in their core elements, were not subjected to the adversarial testing that defines a courtroom proceeding. There was no cross-examination to challenge interpretations, no legal argument to explore alternative perspectives, and no formal verdict delivered by a judge or jury. The absence of these elements creates a different kind of closure, one that is less defined by legal finality and more by factual understanding. It answers certain questions with a high degree of certainty, particularly those related to what happened and who is responsible. At the same time, it leaves other questions less fully addressed, especially those that might have been explored through direct testimony. Without the presence of the suspect, there is no opportunity to hear his account, no chance to understand his perspective in his own words, and no way to reconcile or challenge that perspective within a formal setting. This gap is not unusual in cases where the suspect is no longer alive, but it is significant. It means that the narrative, while grounded in evidence, remains partially one-sided. The investigation provides a reconstruction based on available information, but it cannot fully access the internal motivations or decision-making processes that led to the act. These aspects remain inferred rather than explicitly stated, understood through patterns and context rather than direct explanation. From a legal standpoint, the case effectively concluded with the confirmation of the suspect's death. There was no further action that could be taken within the framework of criminal prosecution. The system, designed to hold individuals accountable through trial and sentencing, reached the limits of its function in this instance. Accountability, in the formal sense, could not be imposed because the individual responsible was no longer subject to the jurisdiction of the court. However, the absence of formal accountability does not erase the significance of what occurred. The findings of the investigation still carry weight, providing a clear and documented account of the events. They establish responsibility in a factual sense, even if that responsibility is not translated into a legal judgment. This distinction is important because it separates the concept of understanding from the concept of formal adjudication. One can exist without the other, as it does in this case. For the community, the lack of a trial can create a sense of incompleteness. Court proceedings often serve not only a legal function, but also a social one. They provide a space where events are publicly examined, where the impact of a crime is acknowledged, and where a structured conclusion is reached. Without that process, there can be a perception that something is missing, that the case has ended without the full expression of justice as it is typically understood. At the same time, the investigation itself offers a form of clarity. It answers the central questions that define the case, removing uncertainty about the identity of the perpetrator and the nature of the act. This clarity, while not equivalent to a courtroom verdict, still provides a foundation for understanding. It allows the case to be situated within a framework of known facts, even as it leaves certain dimensions unexplored. The legal outcome, then, is defined as much by what did not happen as by what did. There was no trial, no formal conviction, no sentencing. Instead, there was a conclusion reached through investigation, a determination based on evidence that stands without the additional validation of a court proceeding. This outcome reflects the reality of the situation, shaped by circumstances that cannot be altered. It also highlights the limitations of the legal system in addressing every aspect of a case. The system is structured to operate under certain conditions, to process individuals through defined stages that lead to a resolution. When those conditions are not met, when a key element such as the presence of the suspect is removed, the system must adapt, and the outcome takes a different form. In reflecting on this phase of the case, it becomes clear that the absence of a trial does not diminish the gravity of the events, but it does change the way they are understood and remembered. The narrative remains grounded in the investigation, supported by evidence, but it lacks the additional layer of formal validation that a courtroom provides. This creates a form of resolution that is both complete and incomplete at the same time, complete in its factual clarity, incomplete in its procedural expression. And yet, even without a trial, the case reaches a point where its central elements are established and its immediate questions are answered. What happened is known, who was responsible is known, and the sequence of events has been documented. These elements form the core of the narrative, providing a basis for understanding that does not depend on formal adjudication. Beyond that core, however, there remains a space defined by what cannot be fully addressed, the motivations that are not directly expressed, the perspectives that are not heard, and the legal processes that are not completed. This space does not undermine the case, but it does shape it, influencing how it is perceived and how it continues to be discussed. In the end, the legal outcome of the case surrounding Teresa Cachula stands as an example of how resolution can take different forms. It demonstrates that while the legal system provides a structured path to accountability, that path is not always available in its entirety. When it is not, the understanding of the case must rely on the evidence that remains, on the investigation that has been conducted, and on the recognition that some aspects of the story will remain beyond the reach of formal judgment. In the period that followed the events surrounding Teresa Cachula, the immediate urgency of the investigation gave way to something quieter, but no less significant, a process of collective reflection that unfolded across the community and beyond. When a case concludes without a trial, without the formal structure that typically brings a sense of procedural closure, what remains is not only the factual understanding of what occurred, but the broader question of what it means, and how it should be interpreted within the context of everyday life. The impact on the community in Honolulu was immediate and profound. The fact that the incident had taken place in a public setting meant that it was not confined to a private sphere but had entered the shared awareness of the people who lived and worked there. Public spaces carry an implicit expectation of safety, a belief that while they are open and accessible, they are also governed by a certain predictability. When that expectation is disrupted, it does more than shock. It alters perception. Places that once felt routine can become associated with what occurred there, their meaning reshaped by memory. For those who had been present, the experience did not end with the conclusion of the investigation. The memory of the event remained, not as a distant abstraction, but as something directly observed. Witnessing violence in such close proximity has a way of embedding itself in the mind, influencing how individuals interpret their surroundings long after the immediate moment has passed. The unpredictability of the act, The speed with which it unfolded and the severity of its outcome combined to create an impression that could not easily be dismissed. Beyond those who were physically present, the case resonated more widely, prompting conversations that extended into different areas of public concern. One of the most prominent themes that emerged was the issue of domestic violence, a subject that is often discussed in abstract terms but becomes far more immediate when connected to a specific event. The details that had been established through the investigation, particularly the indications of controlling behavior and the victim's expressed fear, framed the case within a broader pattern that is recognized but not always fully understood. This shift from individual case to broader pattern is significant because it changes the way the event is interpreted. It is no longer seen solely as an isolated act but as part of a continuum, one that includes other situations where similar dynamics are present. The recognition of that continuum raises questions about how such situations are identified, how they are addressed, and what mechanisms exist to prevent escalation. In this context, the case prompted a reevaluation of the systems designed to protect individuals in vulnerable situations. Questions were raised about the effectiveness of those systems, about whether the warning signs that had been present were sufficient to trigger intervention, and about what barriers might have prevented that intervention from occurring. These questions do not have simple answers, but they are essential to understanding the implications of a case. At the same time, the discussion extended into the realm of public safety more broadly. The use of a firearm in a public setting introduced concerns about access, regulation, and the conditions under which such acts can occur. While the case itself does not provide detailed information about how the weapon was obtained or managed, its presence in the incident adds another layer to the conversation, one that intersects with ongoing debates about safety and prevention. These broader discussions, while important, do not replace the central reality of the case, which is the loss of a life. It is easy, in the process of analysis, to move toward generalization, to focus on patterns and systems rather than individuals. But at the center of this narrative is a person, someone whose life was defined not by the moment of her death, but by the years that preceded it, by the work she did, the relationships she maintained, and the effort she made to build stability for herself. Remembering Teresa Kachula in this way is essential because it prevents the case from being reduced to a single event. It acknowledges that her identity is not confined to what happened in that moment, that her life extends beyond the circumstances of her death. This perspective is particularly important in cases of this nature, where the focus can easily shift toward the act of violence and away from the individual who is affected by it. At the same time, the case serves as a reminder of how easily signs of risk can be overlooked or underestimated. The information available indicates that there were indicators of instability, that there were expressions of fear, and that the relationship in question had elements that suggested potential danger. These indicators, while present, did not result in an outcome that prevented the final act. This gap between recognition and intervention is one of the most difficult aspects of cases like this, because it highlights the limitations of both awareness and action. Understanding this gap requires acknowledging the complexity of such situations. It is not enough to identify warning signs. There must also be mechanisms that allow those signs to be acted upon effectively. These mechanisms involve not only formal systems, such as law enforcement and social services, but also informal networks, including friends, family, and community members. Each of these elements plays a role, and the effectiveness of that role depends on a range of factors, including access, communication, and the willingness to intervene. The case also raises questions about timing, about the point at which intervention is possible and the point at which it becomes too late. In many situations, the progression from tension to violence is gradual, marked by incremental changes that may not immediately appear critical. Recognizing when those changes have reached a threshold that requires decisive action is a challenge, one that is compounded by uncertainty and the difficulty of predicting outcomes. In reflecting on these issues, it becomes clear that the significance of the case extends beyond its immediate details. It serves as a point of reference, a situation that can be examined to better understand how similar cases might be prevented in the future. This does not mean that every aspect can be translated into a clear solution, but it does provide an opportunity to identify areas where awareness can be increased and responses can be improved. At the same time, It is important to recognize that not all cases will follow the same pattern, and not all outcomes can be predicted or prevented. The goal is not to eliminate uncertainty entirely, which is not possible, but to reduce the conditions under which such events can occur, to create environments where warning signs are more likely to be recognized and addressed before they escalate. As the narrative reaches its final stage, it does so with a sense of unresolved complexity rather than definitive closure. The facts of the case are known, the sequence of events established, and the immediate questions answered. But the broader implications, the questions about prevention, intervention, and understanding, remain open, inviting continued reflection rather than final resolution. In the end, the case of Teresa Kachula is not only about what happened on a single day in Honolulu. It is about the conditions that made that moment possible, the systems that responded to it, and the ways in which it continues to shape understanding long after the immediate events have passed. It is a story that does not end with a single conclusion, but continues in the awareness it creates and the questions it leaves behind, a reminder that even in the absence of complete answers, there is value in examining what can be known and in using that knowledge to inform what comes next. As time moves forward, cases like that of Teresa Kachula do not simply fade into the past. Instead, they settle into a different space, one that exists between memory and meaning, where the facts remain fixed, but their interpretation continues to evolve. What happened on that day in Honolulu is no longer an unfolding event, no longer something being actively investigated or pursued, yet it remains present in a quieter, more enduring way. It becomes part of a larger narrative about safety, about relationships, and about the limits of what can be seen before it is too late. In this phase, the story is no longer driven by urgency or discovery. There are no new developments, no sudden revelations that change the understanding of what occurred. Instead, there is a gradual process of integration where the case is absorbed into the broader awareness of those who have encountered it. This process is not uniform. It varies from person to person, shaped by individual perspectives and experiences. For some, it remains a distant story, something encountered briefly and then set aside. For others, particularly those closer to the event or more attuned to its themes, it becomes a point of ongoing reflection. One of the defining characteristics of this stage is the way in which the absence of a traditional resolution continues to shape perception. Without a trial, without a formal verdict delivered in a courtroom, the case does not conclude in the structured way that many people expect. There is no final moment of judgment, no official declaration that marks the end of the process. Instead, the conclusion is quieter, defined by the end of the investigation and the recognition that certain aspects of the story will remain beyond complete explanation. This kind of ending can be difficult to process because it does not provide the same sense of closure. Closure, in a legal sense, often comes from the completion of a process, from the idea that all available evidence has been examined and a definitive outcome has been reached. In this case, while the core facts are established, the absence of that formal process leaves a space that is not fully resolved. It is a space where understanding exists, but finality does not. At the same time, this lack of formal closure does not diminish the significance of what has been learned. The investigation has provided a clear account of the sequence of events, identifying the individuals involved and the actions that led to the outcome. These elements form a foundation of certainty, a set of facts that do not change even as the interpretation of those facts continues to develop. It is within this balance between certainty and uncertainty that the case finds its lasting place. As the story becomes part of a broader conversation, it begins to intersect with other cases, other experiences, and other discussions about similar themes. The dynamics of control, fear, and escalation that were present in Teresa's situation are not unique, and recognizing this connection is an important part of understanding the case. It allows the story to move beyond its individual context and contribute to a larger framework of awareness. This broader perspective brings with it both clarity and complexity. On one hand, it helps to identify patterns, to see how certain behaviors and circumstances can lead to similar outcomes across different situations. On the other hand, it also highlights the variability of those situations, the ways in which each case is shaped by its own specific details and cannot be reduced to a single formula. This duality, pattern, and variation is central to the ongoing relevance of the case. Another aspect of this stage is the role of memory, not just as a record of what happened, but as a means of preserving significance. Memory is selective, shaped by what is emphasized and what is repeated. In the case of Teresa Cachula, the focus on her as an individual, rather than solely on the act of violence, plays a critical role in how the story is retained. It ensures that the narrative remains connected to a person, to a life that existed beyond the circumstances of its end. This emphasis is important because it resists a common tendency in discussions of crime, the shift toward abstraction, where cases become examples rather than stories about real people. While abstraction can be useful for analysis, it can also distance the audience from the human reality at the center of the narrative. Maintaining that connection helps to preserve the meaning of the case, ensuring that it is not reduced to a set of facts or a point in a larger argument. At the same time, the case continues to raise questions that do not have simple answers. Questions about prevention, about intervention, about the effectiveness of existing systems, and about the role of individuals within those systems. These questions are not resolved by the conclusion of the case. They persist, inviting ongoing consideration. They are part of what keeps the story relevant, what prevents it from becoming static. In reflecting on these questions, it becomes clear that the significance of the case lies not only in what happened, but in what it reveals about the conditions that allow such events to occur. It highlights the importance of recognizing warning signs, of understanding the dynamics of relationships that involve control and fear, and of considering how those dynamics can be addressed before they escalate. At the same time, it acknowledges the difficulty of doing so, the uncertainty that often accompanies such situations, and the limitations that can exist even when concerns are identified. This recognition does not lead to a single solution or a definitive conclusion. Instead, it contributes to a gradual process of learning, where each case adds to a body of knowledge that can inform future responses. It is a process that depends on attention, on the willingness to examine difficult situations and to consider what they reveal, even when the answers are not clear. As the narrative continues to settle into its place within this broader context, it retains a certain quiet persistence. It is not constantly at the forefront of attention, but it does not disappear. It remains accessible, available to be revisited, to be reconsidered in light of new experiences or new information. This persistence is part of what gives the case its lasting impact, allowing it to continue to influence understanding over time. In the end, the story of Teresa Cachula does not conclude with a single statement or a definitive resolution. It remains open in certain respects, defined as much by the questions it raises as by the answers it provides. It is a story that continues to exist, not as an active investigation, but as a point of reflection, a reminder of the complexities of human relationships, the challenges of recognition and intervention, and the importance of maintaining awareness even in situations that appear, on the surface,
to be ordinary.
And in that ongoing presence, it serves a purpose that extends beyond its immediate details. It encourages a deeper engagement with the realities it reflects, a more careful consideration of the signs that may otherwise go unnoticed, and a recognition that understanding is not a fixed endpoint, but a process that continues, shaped by each case, each reflection, and each effort to see more clearly what lies beneath the surface. In the long arc of time that follows a case like the one involving Teresa Cachula, what remains is not simply a record of events, but a shifting landscape of meaning. The facts do not change, the sequence of actions remains fixed, yet the way those facts are understood continues to evolve as they are revisited through different lenses. This evolution does not happen all at once, nor does it move in a single direction. It unfolds gradually, shaped by memory, by conversation, and by the broader context in which the story is placed. At this stage, the case exists less as an isolated incident and more as part of an ongoing dialogue about safety, relationships, and the nature of warning signs that precede acts of violence. The details that once seemed specific to a single situation begin to resonate in other contexts, prompting comparisons and reflections that extend beyond the original event. This does not diminish the individuality of a case, but it does position it within a larger framework, one that seeks to understand patterns without reducing them to simple formulas. One of the central elements that continues to draw attention is the presence of indicators that, in retrospect, appear significant. The reported fear expressed by Teresa, the controlling behavior attributed to her husband, and the tension surrounding their separation all form a constellation of factors that suggest instability. At the time, these factors existed within the private sphere of the relationship, not fully visible or understood by those outside it. Only later, when placed alongside the outcome, do they take on a different weight, appearing as signs that pointed toward a potential escalation. This retrospective clarity is both useful and limited. It allows for a better understanding of how certain dynamics can develop, but it also carries the risk of oversimplification. Not every situation that includes tension or control leads to violence, and distinguishing between those that will escalate and those that will not is inherently difficult. This complexity is part of what makes prevention challenging, requiring not only awareness but also careful judgment and, in many cases, a willingness to act in the face of uncertainty. The case also highlights the role of timing, the narrow window in which intervention might be possible before a situation reaches a point of no return. Identifying that window is not straightforward. It depends on recognizing patterns early, on having mechanisms in place to respond effectively, and on the ability of individuals to communicate their concerns in ways that lead to action. Each of these elements introduces its own set of challenges, and the absence of any one of them can limit the effectiveness of a response. As the story continues to be discussed, it contributes to a broader understanding of these challenges. It becomes part of a collective effort to identify where systems succeed and where they fall short, where awareness leads to action and where it does not. This process is incremental, built over time through the accumulation of cases and the analysis of their outcomes. No single case provides all the answers, but each one adds a piece to a larger picture. In this context, the absence of a trial in Teresa's case takes on additional significance. Without the structured examination that a courtroom provides, the interpretation of events relies more heavily on the investigation and on the discussions that follow. This places a greater emphasis on how information is communicated and understood, on the narratives that are constructed from the available facts. These narratives, while grounded in evidence, are shaped by perspective, by the questions that are asked and the aspects that are emphasized. The lack of a formal legal conclusion also means that the case remains open in a certain sense, not in terms of factual uncertainty, but in terms of interpretation. There is no single authoritative narrative that resolves all questions, no definitive statement that closes off further inquiry. Instead, the story remains accessible to reinterpretation, allowing it to be revisited and reconsidered as part of ongoing discussions about similar issues. At the same time, the enduring presence of the case is closely tied to the memory of Teresa herself. Maintaining that connection is essential, not only as a matter of respect, but as a way of grounding the broader discussions in a human reality. It ensures that the focus does not drift entirely toward abstraction, that the analysis remains connected to the life that was affected and the circumstances that led to its loss. Remembering her in this way also reinforces the importance of perspective. It shifts the emphasis away from the act of violence and toward the person who experienced it, highlighting the impact rather than the mechanism. This perspective is particularly important in preventing the normalization of such events, ensuring that they are recognized as significant disruptions rather than as routine occurrences. As time passes, the case may become less immediate, less frequently discussed, but it does not lose its relevance. Instead, it becomes part of a reservoir of knowledge that can be drawn upon when similar situations arise. It informs how people think about risk, about relationships, and about the importance of paying attention to signs that might otherwise be dismissed. This influence is subtle, not always visible, but it contributes to a gradual shift in awareness. That shift, however, is not guaranteed. Awareness does not automatically translate into action, and understanding does not always lead to change. The case serves as a reminder of this gap, highlighting the difference between recognizing a problem and effectively addressing it. Bridging that gap requires more than information. It requires structures, resources, and a willingness to engage with difficult situations in meaningful ways. In reflecting on these dynamics, it becomes clear that the significance of the case lies not only in what it reveals, but in how it is used. The information it provides can either remain static, a record of what happened, or it can be integrated into efforts to improve understanding and response. This choice is not made once, but repeatedly, as the case is revisited and reinterpreted in different contexts. The ongoing presence of the story also raises questions about how such cases are remembered over the long term. Memory can fade, details can be lost, and the emotional intensity of an event can diminish with time. Yet certain cases persist, maintained through retelling and reflection. The factors that contribute to this persistence are varied, including the nature of the event, its impact on the community, and the broader issues it represents. In the case of Teresa Cachula, the combination of public violence, underlying relationship dynamics, and the absence of a traditional legal resolution contributes to its lasting presence. These elements create a narrative that is both specific and broadly relevant, one that continues to resonate even as it becomes more distant in time. Ultimately, the story does not resolve into a single lesson or a definitive conclusion. Instead, it remains open, characterized by a set of insights that can be applied in different ways depending on the context. It encourages attention to detail, awareness of patterns, and a recognition of the complexities involved in identifying and addressing risk. It also underscores the importance of maintaining a connection to the individuals at the center of such cases, ensuring that their experiences are not overshadowed by the broader discussions they inspire. In this way, the case continues to exist, not as an active event, but as a point of reference, a reminder of what can happen when underlying tensions escalate and when warning signs are not fully addressed. It is a story that persists through its implications, through the questions it raises and the awareness it fosters, a quiet but enduring presence that shapes understanding long after the immediate events have passed. As the story continues to extend beyond its immediate timeframe, the case of Teresa Cachula begins to take on a different kind of permanence, one that is less about the specifics of the event and more about the way it integrates into collective understanding. Over time, individual cases that carry both emotional weight and broader implications tend to move from being immediate news to becoming reference points, examples that are recalled when similar patterns emerge or when discussions about prevention and awareness take shape. This transition is subtle, but it marks an important shift in how the case is perceived and used. In Honolulu, where the event unfolded, this shift is intertwined with the rhythm of daily life. The city does not stop, routines resume, and the visible signs of disruption gradually fade. Yet beneath that surface, there remains an awareness that something significant occurred, something that altered the perception of what is possible within spaces that are otherwise considered ordinary. This awareness does not dominate everyday thought, but it exists in the background, influencing how people interpret certain situations and how they respond to signs of tension or conflict when they appear. One of the ways this influence manifests is through heightened sensitivity to behavioral cues. The details that were later understood to be warning signs in Teresa's situation become part of a mental framework that people may apply in their own lives. Observations that might previously have been dismissed or minimized can take on greater importance, prompting a more cautious or attentive response. This does not mean that every instance of tension is viewed as a precursor to violence, but it does suggest a shift toward greater consideration of what such tension might indicate. At the same time, there is an inherent challenge in maintaining this level of awareness without allowing it to become overwhelming. Constant vigilance is not sustainable, and interpreting every situation through the lens of potential risk can lead to unnecessary anxiety. The balance between awareness and normalcy is delicate, requiring an ability to recognize patterns without assuming that all patterns will lead to the same outcome. This balance is not easily achieved, and it varies from person to person, shaped by individual experiences and perspectives. The case also continues to inform discussions about the structures that exist to address situations involving potential harm. These structures include formal systems such as law enforcement and social services, as well as informal networks of support among friends, family, and community members. The effectiveness of these systems depends not only on their design, but also on how they are used, on the willingness of individuals to engage with them, and the accessibility of the resources they provide. In reflecting on Teresa's case, questions persist about how these systems functioned and whether there were opportunities for intervention that were not realized. These questions are not necessarily aimed at assigning blame, but rather at understanding how similar situations might be approached differently in the future. They highlight the importance of communication, of creating environments where concerns can be expressed and addressed without hesitation or fear of misunderstanding. Another dimension of the case that continues to resonate is the role of public space in shaping perception. The fact that the incident occurred in an open, visible environment challenges assumptions about where violence is likely to occur. It disrupts the idea that such acts are confined to private settings, reinforcing the understanding that they can emerge in places that are otherwise associated with routine and safety. This realization does not redefine public space entirely, but it adds a layer of complexity to how it is perceived. As the narrative moves further from the original event, the emphasis increasingly shifts toward meaning rather than detail. The specific sequence of actions becomes less central than the broader themes that the case represents. These themes include the dynamics of relationships marked by control and fear, the process by which such dynamics can escalate, and the difficulties involved in identifying and responding to warning signs before they culminate in violence. Within this framework, the memory of Teresa Cachula serves as an anchor, ensuring that the discussion remains connected to an individual rather than becoming entirely abstract. This connection is essential for maintaining the human dimension of the case, for recognizing that behind every pattern or principle is a real person whose life was affected. It also reinforces the importance of empathy, of approaching such cases with an awareness of their personal impact rather than viewing them solely as analytical subjects. The ongoing relevance of the case is also shaped by its unresolved aspects. The absence of a trial, the lack of direct testimony from the perpetrator, and the incomplete understanding of his motivations all contribute to a sense that the story does not have a fully defined endpoint. This lack of finality can be unsettling, but it also keeps the case open to continued reflection. It resists the tendency to categorize and conclude, instead remaining active in the sense that it continues to generate questions. These questions are not always answerable, and that is part of their significance. They highlight the limits of what can be known, the boundaries of understanding that exist even when evidence is clear. They also emphasize the importance of humility in approaching such cases, recognizing that certainty has its limits and that some aspects of human behavior cannot be fully explained. As time progresses, the case may be revisited in different contexts, referenced in discussions about policy, about community awareness, or about the dynamics of interpersonal relationships. Each of these contexts brings a different perspective, emphasizing certain aspects of the case, while setting others aside. This process of reinterpretation is part of how the case continues to live on, adapting to the needs and concerns of the moment while retaining its core elements. In this way, the story becomes part of a larger narrative about how societies respond to and learn from acts of violence. It contributes to an ongoing effort to understand not only what happens, but why it happens and how it might be prevented. This effort is cumulative, built from multiple cases and multiple perspectives, each adding to a body of knowledge that evolves over time. At the same time, it is important to recognize that learning from such cases does not guarantee prevention. The conditions that lead to violence are complex, influenced by a range of factors that cannot always be controlled or predicted. The value of understanding lies not in eliminating risk entirely, but in reducing it, in creating conditions where intervention is more likely and where warning signs are less likely to go unnoticed. In reflecting on the enduring presence of the case of Teresa Cachula, it becomes clear that its significance lies in both its specificity and its generality. It is a unique event with its own particular details, but it also represents broader patterns and challenges that extend beyond a single situation. This dual nature allows it to function as both a story and a reference point, something that can be understood on its own terms while also contributing to a wider understanding. And so the narrative continues, not as an unfolding sequence of events, but as a stable set of facts that are continually reinterpreted in light of new experiences and new insights. It remains present, not in the sense of urgency, but in the sense of relevance, a reminder that understanding is an ongoing process, one that requires attention, reflection, and a willingness to engage with complexity even when definitive answers are not available. As the narrative surrounding Teresa Cachula continues to settle into the broader landscape of memory and reflection, it reaches a stage where its significance is no longer tied to immediacy, but to endurance. Time creates distance, and with that distance comes a different kind of clarity, one that is less influenced by the shock of the moment and more by the quiet persistence of understanding. The case becomes something that exists not at the forefront of attention, but in the background of awareness, ready to surface whenever its themes intersect with new experiences or renewed discussions. In Honolulu, the passage of time gradually restores the outward appearance of normalcy. Streets return to their routines, public spaces regain their familiar rhythms, and the visible traces of disruption fade into the ordinary flow of daily life. Yet beneath this surface, the memory of what occurred does not disappear. It becomes part of the collective consciousness, integrated into the way people perceive their environment and the interactions that take place within it. This integration is subtle, often unspoken, but it shapes perception in ways that are not always immediately apparent. One of the most enduring aspects of the case is the way it influences the interpretation of human behavior. The details that were once specific to a single situation begin to inform a broader understanding of how relationships can evolve under pressure, how control and fear can develop gradually, and how these dynamics can sometimes escalate into irreversible actions. This understanding does not lead to a definitive formula for identifying risk, but it provides a framework through which certain patterns can be recognized more readily. At the same time, this framework must coexist with the recognition that not all situations follow the same trajectory. The presence of tension or control within a relationship does not inevitably lead to violence, and distinguishing between situations that will escalate and those that will not remains a complex challenge. This complexity is an essential part of the narrative, reminding those who reflect on the case that awareness must be accompanied by careful consideration, not by assumptions or oversimplifications. The absence of a formal trial continues to shape the long-term perception of the case. Without the structured process of legal examination, the narrative remains rooted in the findings of the investigation and the interpretations that have emerged from it. There is no definitive moment of closure, no formal conclusion that resolves all questions within a legal framework. Instead, the case exists in a state of factual certainty combined with interpretive openness, where the core events are known but their deeper implications remain subject to ongoing reflection. This openness allows the case to be revisited in different contexts, each time revealing new dimensions or reinforcing existing insights. It becomes a point of reference in discussions about domestic violence, about public safety, and about the mechanisms through which warning signs are identified and addressed. In each of these discussions, the case contributes not as a complete answer, but as a source of perspective, a reminder of the complexities involved and the importance of continued attention. The memory of Teresa Cachula remains central to this process. It anchors the narrative in a human reality, ensuring that the case is not reduced to an abstract example or a set of generalized principles. Her life, her efforts to build stability, and the challenges she faced within her personal circumstances all form part of the context through which the event is understood. This emphasis on the individual is essential, as it maintains the connection between analysis and empathy, between understanding and recognition of loss. As the case becomes more distant in time, it also becomes part of a broader pattern of stories that collectively shape how society understands and responds to similar situations. Each case adds to a cumulative body of knowledge, contributing insights that may inform future actions and decisions. This cumulative process is gradual, built over years and across different contexts, but it is through this process that meaningful change can occur. However, the existence of this knowledge does not guarantee its application. The gap between understanding and action remains a persistent challenge, one that is evident in many areas of social response. Recognizing warning signs is one step, but acting on that recognition requires resources, coordination, and a willingness to intervene in situations that may be complex and uncertain. The case highlights this gap, not as a failure of a single system, but as an ongoing challenge that requires continuous attention. Another aspect of the case that continues to resonate is the role of unpredictability. Even with the presence of warning signs, the exact moment and manner in which an act of violence occurs can be difficult to anticipate. This unpredictability reinforces the need for vigilance, but it also underscores the limits of prediction. It reminds those who reflect on the case that while patterns can be identified, outcomes cannot always be controlled. In the long term, the significance of the case lies in its ability to remain relevant without dominating attention. It becomes part of a larger conversation, contributing to an evolving understanding that is shaped by multiple perspectives and experiences. This relevance is sustained not through constant focus, but through periodic reflection, through moments when the themes of the case intersect with current concerns or new information. The narrative, in this final stage, is defined by its continuity rather than its conclusion. It does not end in a definitive statement or a clear resolution, but continues as a point of reference, a story that informs rather than dictates, that suggests rather than concludes. This form of continuity is less dramatic than a conventional ending, but it is no less meaningful. It reflects the reality that understanding is not a fixed endpoint, but an ongoing process. In reflecting on the enduring presence of the case of Teresa Cachula, it becomes clear that its impact extends beyond the specifics of the event. It influences how people think about relationships, about safety, and about the importance of recognizing and responding to signs of risk. It contributes to a broader awareness that, while not always visible, shapes perception and decision-making over time. And so the story remains, not as an active investigation or a recent event, but as a quiet, persistent presence within the collective understanding. It is a reminder of what can occur when certain dynamics are left unresolved, of the importance of attention and intervention, and of the complexities that define human behavior. It does not offer simple answers or definitive solutions, but it provides a framework for thinking, a basis for reflection that continues to evolve as it is revisited and reconsidered. In this way, the narrative reaches a form of completion that is not defined by finality, but by its capacity to endure. It remains accessible, relevant, and open, a story that continues to inform and to resonate, long after the immediate events have passed and the visible traces have faded into the ordinary flow of time. As the narrative continues beyond what might traditionally be considered its endpoint, the case of Teresa Cachula enters a phase defined less by events and more by interpretation. Time does not erase what happened, but it changes how it is held in memory, how it is revisited, and how it is integrated into broader understandings of human behavior and social response. The details remain intact, the sequence unchanged, yet their significance continues to shift as they are examined from new angles and in new contexts. In Honolulu, the environment in which the incident occurred has long since returned to its usual rhythm. The physical space no longer bears visible marks of what took place, and for those who are not directly affected, the event may exist only as a distant recollection, if it is remembered at all. Yet for others, particularly those who have engaged more deeply with the case or with similar issues, it remains present in a more active way, shaping how they think about risk, about relationships, and about the importance of awareness. This divergence in how the case is remembered is an important aspect of its long-term impact. Not every story maintains the same level of visibility over time, and the factors that determine which ones do are complex. In this instance, the combination of public violence, underlying relational tension, and the absence of a conventional legal resolution contributes to its persistence. These elements create a narrative that is both specific and broadly relevant, one that can be revisited as part of ongoing discussions about similar concerns. One of the most enduring questions that the case raises is how warning signs are recognized and interpreted. The information available suggests that there were indicators of instability, expressions of fear, and patterns of behavior that pointed toward a troubled relationship. In retrospect, these indicators appear significant, even obvious. But at the time, they existed within a context that may not have made their implications fully clear. This gap between recognition and understanding is a recurring theme in cases of this nature, highlighting the difficulty of distinguishing between situations that will escalate and those that will not. The challenge is not simply one of awareness, but of interpretation. Recognizing that a situation is problematic is one step, but determining its potential trajectory requires a level of insight that is not always available. This uncertainty can lead to hesitation, to a reluctance to intervene without clear evidence of immediate danger. The case illustrates how such hesitation, even when understandable, can leave underlying issues unresolved, allowing them to develop further. At the same time, it is important to acknowledge that intervention is not a simple or guaranteed solution. The dynamics of relationships marked by control and fear are often complex, involving factors that are not easily addressed through external action. Even when concerns are identified, the ability to effect meaningful change depends on a range of conditions, including the willingness of those involved to engage with support systems and the availability of resources that can provide effective assistance. The case also underscores the importance of communication, both in recognizing potential risks and in responding to them. The ability to express concerns, to seek help, and to be heard plays a critical role in how situations evolve. When communication is limited, whether by fear, by isolation, or by other constraints, the likelihood of effective intervention is reduced. This aspect of the case highlights the need for environments in which individuals feel able to speak openly about their circumstances and to access support without undue barriers. As the narrative continues to be examined, it also contributes to a broader understanding of how public and private spheres intersect. The incident itself occurred in a public setting, yet the factors that led to it were rooted in a private relationship. This intersection challenges the notion that such issues are confined to one domain or the other, illustrating how dynamics that develop in private can have consequences that extend into public spaces. Recognizing this connection is essential for developing a more comprehensive approach to prevention and response. The absence of a trial remains a defining feature of the case, shaping how it is understood and remembered. Without the formal process of legal examination, the narrative relies more heavily on the investigation and on the interpretations that have emerged from it. This reliance introduces a degree of openness, allowing for multiple perspectives while also limiting the extent to which certain questions can be definitively answered. It is a reminder that not all cases reach a point of complete resolution, and that understanding often involves navigating areas of uncertainty. In maintaining a focus on Teresa Kachula as an individual, the narrative resists becoming purely analytical. It emphasizes that behind the broader themes and discussions is a person whose life was shaped by a range of experiences, aspirations, and challenges. This perspective is essential for preserving the human dimension of the case, ensuring that it is not reduced to an abstract example or a collection of data points. At the same time, the case serves as a point of reference for considering how similar situations might be approached in the future. It contributes to an ongoing dialogue about the effectiveness of existing systems, the importance of early recognition of warning signs, and the ways in which communities can support individuals who may be at risk. This dialogue is not static. It evolves as new information becomes available and as societal perspectives shift. The process of learning from such cases is gradual and cumulative. No single event provides all the answers, and the insights gained from one situation must be considered alongside those from others. Together, they form a body of knowledge that can inform policy, practice, and individual decision-making. The case of Teresa Kachula is part of this larger process, contributing its specific details to a broader understanding. As time continues to pass, the narrative becomes less about what happened and more about what it represents. It stands as an example of how certain dynamics can develop and escalate, of the challenges involved in recognizing and addressing those dynamics, and of the impact that such situations can have on individuals and communities. This representational role is what allows the case to remain relevant, even as it becomes more distant in time. In the end, the story does not conclude in a traditional sense. It does not offer a final resolution or a definitive lesson that can be applied universally. Instead, it remains open, characterized by a set of insights that can be interpreted and applied in different ways depending on the context. It encourages ongoing reflection, a continued effort to understand the complexities it reveals, and to consider how that understanding might inform future actions. And in that ongoing process, the case of Teresa Cachula continues to exist, not as an active event, but as a persistent presence within the broader landscape of awareness. It is a story that endures, not because it demands attention, but because it offers something that remains relevant, a perspective on human behavior and social response that continues to resonate long after the immediate events have passed. As the narrative moves further into its final phase, the story of Teresa Cachula settles into a space where reflection becomes the dominant mode of engagement. The urgency that once defined each step of the investigation has long since dissipated, replaced by a quieter, more enduring contemplation of what the case represents and how it continues to influence understanding. In this stage, the focus is no longer on uncovering new information or reconstructing events, but on interpreting the meaning that those events carry over time. In Honolulu, the physical environment bears little trace of what occurred. The passage of time has restored the outward appearance of normalcy, and for many, the location is simply another part of the city's landscape. Yet the absence of visible markers does not equate to the absence of memory. For those who are aware of the case, the knowledge remains, shaping perception in subtle ways. It becomes part of the mental framework through which certain situations are interpreted, influencing how people think about safety, about relationships, and about the potential for unseen tensions to exist beneath ordinary appearances. This influence is not always conscious. It operates in the background, affecting how individuals respond to cues that might otherwise go unnoticed. A raised voice, a moment of visible discomfort, or a pattern of controlling behavior may be interpreted differently when viewed through the lens of past cases. This does not mean that every such observation leads to a conclusion of risk, but it does suggest a heightened sensitivity, an awareness that certain dynamics can have serious consequences if left unaddressed. At the same time, this heightened awareness must be balanced with an understanding of complexity. Human relationships are varied and multifaceted, and not all signs of tension indicate the same level of risk. The challenge lies in distinguishing between situations that require intervention and those that can be resolved without external involvement. This distinction is not always clear, and it requires both knowledge and judgment, as well as the ability to navigate uncertainty without becoming either complacent or overly reactive. The case also continues to highlight the importance of systems designed to support individuals who may be experiencing fear or instability in their relationships. These systems, whether formal or informal, play a critical role in providing resources, guidance, and protection. The effectiveness of these systems depends on multiple factors, including accessibility, awareness, and the willingness of individuals to engage with them. The case raises questions about how these factors align, about whether opportunities for support were available and utilized, and about how such systems can be strengthened in the future. Another aspect of the case that remains significant is the intersection between private experiences and public outcomes. The dynamics that contributed to the incident were rooted in a personal relationship, yet the act itself occurred in a public setting, making it visible to others and amplifying its impact. This intersection challenges the notion that issues of this nature are confined to private spaces, emphasizing the need for a broader perspective that considers how private tensions can manifest in ways that affect the wider community. The absence of a trial continues to shape the way the case is understood. Without the formal structure of legal proceedings, there is no singular narrative that has been tested and validated through the adversarial process. Instead, the understanding of the case is derived from the investigation and from the interpretations that have emerged in its aftermath. This creates a form of openness, where certain aspects are clearly established while others remain less defined, allowing for ongoing reflection and discussion. In maintaining a focus on Teresa Cachula as an individual, the narrative resists becoming detached from its human core. It emphasizes that the case is not merely a set of events or a topic for analysis, but a story that involves a person whose life encompassed more than the circumstances of its end. This emphasis is essential for preserving the integrity of the narrative, ensuring that it remains grounded in empathy as well as understanding. As the story continues to be revisited, it contributes to a broader dialogue about prevention and awareness. It serves as a reminder that many cases of this nature do not emerge without warning, that there are often indicators that, if recognized and addressed, might alter the course of events. At the same time, it acknowledges the difficulty of acting on those indicators, the challenges involved in interpreting them correctly, and in responding in ways that are both effective and appropriate. This duality, the presence of warning signs and the difficulty of acting upon them, is central to the ongoing relevance of the case. It underscores the need for continued effort, for the development of systems and practices that can better support individuals and communities in recognizing and addressing potential risks. It also highlights the importance of education, of ensuring that people have the knowledge and resources necessary to respond to situations that may otherwise be misunderstood or overlooked. The narrative, in this stage, is characterized by its continuity rather than its conclusion. It does not end with a definitive statement or a clear resolution, but continues as part of an evolving understanding. Each time it is revisited, it offers an opportunity to reflect, to reconsider, and to integrate its insights into a broader perspective. This process is ongoing, shaped by new experiences and by the changing context in which the case is understood. In reflecting on the enduring presence of the case of Teresa Cachula, it becomes evident that its significance lies not only in what happened, but in how it continues to influence thought and awareness. It is a story that persists, not because it demands attention, but because it offers something that remains relevant, a perspective on human behavior and social response that continues to resonate over time. Ultimately, the case serves as a reminder of the importance of attention, of the need to look beyond the surface of everyday interactions and to recognize the complexities that may lie beneath. It encourages a more thoughtful approach to understanding relationships, a greater awareness of the signs that may indicate risk, and a recognition of the role that individuals and communities can play in addressing those risks. And so, even as the immediate details of the case recede into the past, its influence remains. It continues to shape understanding, to inform discussions, and to serve as a point of reference for those seeking to navigate the complexities of similar situations. It is a story that endures, not through constant retelling, but through its quiet integration into the broader landscape of awareness, a lasting presence that reflects both the reality of what occurred and the ongoing effort to understand and learn from it. As the narrative reaches its furthest extension, the case of Teresa Cachula settles into a form that is no longer driven by the need to recount or analyze, but by the need to remember and to understand what remains when all available information has already been considered. At this point, the story exists in a quiet space, one that is defined not by urgency or discovery, but by the enduring presence of its implications. It becomes less about what happened and more about what continues to be carried forward, both consciously and unconsciously, by those who encounter it. In Honolulu, life continues in its ordinary rhythm, shaped by routines that move steadily forward without pausing for the events that once disrupted them. The physical setting of the incident blends back into the broader landscape, indistinguishable from countless other places where people gather, move, and interact. Yet the absence of visible reminders does not erase the significance of what occurred. Instead, that significance becomes internalized, held within memory and perception rather than in the environment itself. At this stage, the case functions as a point of quiet reference, something that does not demand attention but remains available whenever its themes intersect with new situations. It is recalled not necessarily in full detail, but in fragments, in impressions, in the recognition of patterns that echo elements of the original narrative. These echoes are subtle, often unnoticed, but they influence how people interpret certain behaviors, how they respond to tension, and how they assess the potential for escalation in relationships that may appear, on the surface, to be ordinary. One of the most enduring aspects of the case is the way it reshapes the understanding of what constitutes a warning sign. The information that emerged through the investigation suggests that there were indicators of fear and control, elements that, when viewed in isolation, might not always be recognized as precursors to violence. It is only in retrospect, when these elements are connected to the outcome, that their significance becomes clear. This retrospective clarity is both informative and limited, providing insight into patterns while also highlighting the difficulty of recognizing those patterns in real time. The challenge, then, is not simply to identify warning signs, but to understand them within the context in which they occur. This requires a level of attentiveness that goes beyond surface observation, an ability to consider how individual behaviors fit into a broader pattern of interaction. It also requires a willingness to engage with uncertainty, to acknowledge that not all situations can be easily categorized or predicted. The case illustrates how the absence of clear boundaries between normal conflict and potential danger can complicate the process of recognition and response. At the same time, the narrative reinforces the importance of maintaining a focus on the individual at its center. Remembering Teresa Cachula as a person, rather than solely as a victim, ensures that the story retains its human dimension. It reminds those who reflect on the case that behind every analysis, every discussion, and every lesson drawn from the event, there is a life that encompassed more than the circumstances of its end. This perspective is essential for preserving the integrity of the narrative, preventing it from becoming detached or purely conceptual. As the case continues to be considered within broader discussions, it contributes to an evolving understanding of how communities respond to situations involving risk and harm. It highlights the role of both formal systems and informal networks in providing support and intervention, and it raises questions about how these systems can be strengthened to better address the complexities they encounter. These questions do not have simple answers, but they are essential for moving beyond awareness toward meaningful action. The absence of a formal trial remains a defining characteristic of the case, shaping its long-term interpretation. Without the structured examination that a courtroom provides, the narrative relies on the investigation and on the interpretations that have emerged in its aftermath. This reliance creates a form of openness, allowing for continued reflection but also leaving certain aspects unresolved. It is a reminder that not all cases reach a point of complete closure, and that understanding often involves accepting the limits of what can be known. This acceptance does not diminish the importance of a case, but it does influence how it is integrated into broader awareness. It becomes a story that is revisited not for definitive answers, but for the insights it offers and the questions it raises. It encourages a mode of engagement that is reflective rather than conclusive, one that values understanding as an ongoing process rather than a final achievement. In this final stage, the narrative is defined by its capacity to endure without demanding attention. It remains present in the background, accessible but not intrusive, a part of the larger body of knowledge that informs how people think about relationships, safety, and the potential for unseen tensions to exist within everyday life. This presence is subtle, but it is also persistent, shaping perception in ways that may not always be immediately apparent. The story of Teresa Cachula, in its extended form, does not resolve into a single lesson or a clear conclusion. Instead, it offers a series of reflections, each one contributing to a broader understanding that continues to evolve over time. It highlights the importance of attention, the complexity of interpretation, and the challenges involved in responding to situations that do not present themselves in straightforward ways. And in doing so, it serves as a quiet reminder of the need to remain aware, to look beyond the surface of interactions, and to recognize that what is visible is not always complete. It encourages a thoughtful approach to understanding human behavior, one that acknowledges both the patterns that can be identified and the uncertainties that remain. It is not a story that provides closure in the traditional sense, but one that continues to resonate, not through repetition, but through its integration into the broader landscape of awareness. In the end, what remains is not just the memory of an event, but the imprint it leaves on understanding. It is a story that persists not because it is retold constantly, but because it offers something that continues to matter, a perspective that informs how similar situations are perceived and approached. It is a reminder that even when a case has reached its factual conclusion, its meaning can continue to unfold, shaped by the ways in which it is remembered, interpreted, and applied in the context of lives that move forward beyond it.